I thought losing him was the end, but it was the beginning of my true self. My name is Amanda Johnson, and I never imagined that I'd be sitting here today, sharing my story on a platform like this. But life has a way of surprising us, especially when we think we have everything figured out. I'm 35 years old, living in Texas, and I've been married to Jason for nearly 10 years. Like most couples, we've had our ups and downs, but I always thought our love was strong enough to get through anything. I was wrong. It all started about 8 months ago. It was just another ordinary evening, or at least that's what I thought. Jason and I were sitting in the living room, watching TV, when he suddenly turned to me with a serious look on his face. I could tell something was bothering him, but I never expected what came next. "Amanda," he began, "I don't know how I feel anymore." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart sank, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I tried to keep calm, hoping he was just going through a rough patch, maybe stress from work or dealing with something he hadn't shared with me yet. But as he continued to speak, I realized that this wasn't just a temporary issue. "I'm not sure if I can feel the same way about us anymore," he said quietly, his eyes avoiding mine. I didn't know how to respond. We had been together for so long. We had shared dreams, plans for the future, and I always believed we were on the same page. Hearing him say that he didn't know if he still loved me the way he used to felt like the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. I asked him what had changed, but his answers were vague. He said he felt disconnected and that he wasn't sure if he could ever feel the same way about me again. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. I thought back to the past year. Sure, we had been busy, with work and life getting in the way, but I didn't think our love had faded. I had no idea he was feeling like this. Instead of reacting in anger or despair, I decided to hold on to hope. I loved Jason with all my heart, and I wasn't ready to give up on our marriage. I suggested that we go to couples counseling, thinking that if we talked through our problems with a professional, maybe we could find a way to reconnect. Jason agreed, though he didn't seem as hopeful as I was. But still, I thought it was a step in the right direction. Over the next few months, we went to therapy sessions, talking about our relationship, our feelings, and where things had gone wrong. Each session was difficult. It wasn't easy hearing Jason express his doubts and uncertainty about our future, but I tried to remain positive. I believed that if we were both willing to put in the effort, we could save our marriage. After all, we had built so much together. I didn't want to throw it all away. But as time went on, it became clear that Jason's feelings weren't changing. He still seemed distant, emotionally checked out, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get through to him. Our conversations outside of therapy became shorter and more awkward. I felt like I was living with a stranger, not the man I had married all those years ago. Then came March 11th, a day I'll never forget. We were in the middle of one of our couples counseling sessions when Jason dropped another bombshell. He looked at me with sad eyes and said, "I don't think there's anything you can do to fix how I feel." It was like my worst fear had come true. I had been holding on to hope for so long, believing that we could work through this, that our love was strong enough to survive. But in that moment, hearing him say those words, I felt like my entire world was falling apart. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg him to change his mind, but I knew that wouldn't help. If his feelings were truly gone, there was nothing I could do to force him to stay. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. I loved Jason, and I was willing to fight for our marriage, no matter how hard it was. I believed that love was worth fighting for, and I wasn't going to walk away without giving it everything I had. But deep down, I could sense that Jason had already checked out. He wasn't fighting for us anymore. He was just going through the motions. What I didn't know at the time was that there was more to the story. In the days that followed, I found out something that broke my heart all over again. Jason had been having an emotional affair throughout the entire time we were trying to fix things. He hadn't been fully honest with me during our therapy sessions. While I was pouring my heart into saving our marriage, he had been emotionally invested in someone else. When I discovered this, it was like the final blow. The betrayal cut deep, and I felt like I had been living a lie. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship, about the man I had loved for so many years, suddenly felt like a distant memory. I couldn't understand how he could do this to me, how he could let our marriage fall apart while giving his heart to someone else. But even after all that, I still wanted to make things work. I confronted him about the emotional affair, and for the first time in a long time, We had a real, honest conversation. He admitted to everything, and for a brief moment, I thought this was a turning point. I thought we could finally rebuild what had been broken. I was willing to forgive him, to move past the pain and try again. But that hope didn't last long. A few days later, Jason came to me and told me that he had already signed the divorce papers. It felt like a punch to the gut. Twice I had been given hope, and twice it had been ripped away from me. Now I was just left waiting for the papers to arrive, waiting for the final blow to our marriage. Looking back, that was the moment when I realized that I couldn't keep living in this limbo, holding on to hope that wasn't there. I had to accept that our marriage was over, that Jason had made his choice, and that it was time for me to move on. It wasn't easy, and I'm still trying to find my way through the pain, but I know that there is life beyond this. After that counseling session on March 11th, when Jason told me there was nothing I could do to fix how he felt, I felt completely lost. It seemed like all the efforts I had put into saving our marriage weren't enough. I kept asking myself, where did we go wrong? Why didn't I see this coming? My mind was spinning with questions, but I had no answers. As the days went by, something just didn't feel right. Jason was acting strange. He wasn't as distant as before, but there was something off in the way he interacted with me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I sensed he was hiding something. Little did I know that my gut feeling was about to lead me to a truth I wasn't prepared to face. One evening, while Jason was out, I decided to check his phone. I know that might seem like a breach of trust, but at that point, I was desperate for answers. Something inside me was screaming that there was more to the story. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Jason had been messaging another woman, someone he had been emotionally involved with for months. My heart sank as I scrolled through their conversations. They weren't physically involved, but the emotional connection they shared was undeniable. The texts were filled with confessions of feelings, late-night chats, and words that should have been reserved for me. He had been pouring his heart out to someone else while I was fighting to save our marriage. I felt betrayed. The man I thought I knew, the man I had loved for nearly a decade, had been hiding this emotional affair while we were supposed to be working on our relationship. In those moments, all of the hope I had clung to felt like it was slipping away. I wanted to confront Jason right then, but I didn't. I needed to process everything first. I spent the next few days trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to pack my bags and leave, but another part of me still wanted to make things work. I wasn't ready to give up, even though he had betrayed me in such a deep way. I had invested so much in our relationship, and I wasn't ready to walk away without giving it one last shot. When I finally confronted Jason, I expected him to deny it or make excuses. But instead, he admitted everything. He confessed that he had been emotionally involved with this other woman for several months. He said that it had started out as a friendship but had turned into something more, something that filled the emotional void he had been feeling in our marriage. Hearing him say those words broke me all over again. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the fact that he had turned to someone else to fill the gaps in our relationship instead of working on it with me. He had made the choice to emotionally invest in someone outside our marriage, and that decision had shattered everything we had built together. Despite the pain, we finally had an honest conversation. For the first time in what felt like forever, we talked openly about our feelings, about where things had gone wrong. Jason admitted that he didn't know how to handle the distance that had grown between us. Instead of talking to me about it, he sought comfort in someone else. He said he was sorry, but deep down, I knew that his apology couldn't fix the damage that had been done. I was willing to forgive him. I told him that, despite everything, I was still willing to work on our marriage. I believed that people could make mistakes and that relationships could be rebuilt if both parties were willing to put in the effort. I didn't want to throw away nearly 10 years of marriage over an emotional affair. I thought we could heal from this, that we could come out stronger on the other side. But as much as I wanted to believe that, Jason wasn't sure. He said he needed time to think, to figure out what he really wanted. He admitted that he didn't know if he could stay in the marriage, even though I was offering him a second chance. It was a painful reality to face, but I still held on to a sliver of hope. I thought that maybe, after everything we had been through, he would choose to stay and fight for us. Days turned into weeks, and I was left in a state of limbo. Jason was distant again, and I could feel the weight of his uncertainty hanging over us. Every day, I woke up wondering if it would be the day he decided to leave for good. It was an exhausting, emotional roller coaster. I felt like I was constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. During this time, I leaned heavily on my friends and family. They offered me the support and advice I needed, reminding me that I was strong enough to get through this, no matter what the outcome would be. But even with their encouragement, I still felt lost. I had invested so much of myself in my marriage, and the thought of it all ending felt unbearable. Jason and I had another conversation a few weeks later, and this time it was different. There was no more pretense, no more tiptoeing around the truth. He told me that he had made his decision. He had signed the divorce papers. He said he couldn't continue living in this limbo, and that he thought it was best for both of us to move on. Hearing those words felt like a knife to my heart. Even though I had sensed this was coming, the finality of it hit me hard. The hope I had been holding on to for so long was gone in an instant. Jason had made his choice, and there was nothing I could do to change it. In that moment, I realized that our marriage was truly over. The emotional affair, the months of uncertainty, and the pain we had both caused each other had led us to this point. I couldn't keep holding on to something that was no longer there. As much as it hurt, I knew that it was time to let go and start the process of healing. Looking back now, I understand that the emotional affair was a symptom of deeper issues in our marriage. While it was incredibly painful to go through, it forced me to confront the reality of our relationship. It wasn't the ending I had hoped for, but it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could focus on myself and my own healing. After the crushing news that Jason had signed the divorce papers, I spent the next few days in a fog. My emotions were all over the place. Some moments I felt numb, other moments I cried uncontrollably. But after all the heartache, something surprising happened. We finally had an honest conversation. For the first time in months, we sat down and talked openly about what had happened, without tiptoeing around the issues or holding back. Jason admitted that the emotional affair had been wrong, and he apologized for the pain he had caused me. Hearing him take responsibility for his actions was both painful and relieving. I had spent so much time wondering if he even cared, and while his apology didn't erase the hurt, it gave me a small sense of closure. For once, I felt like he was truly being honest, and that honesty opened a door I hadn't expected. During that conversation, we reflected on our entire relationship. We talked about the good times, the moments we had shared, and how we had drifted apart without even realizing it. It was heartbreaking to acknowledge how far we had fallen from the people we used to be, but in a strange way, it was also a reminder that, at one point, we had been happy. We had loved each other deeply, and that love hadn't just disappeared overnight. Jason explained that the emotional affair hadn't been about me, but about the emptiness he had felt within himself. He had sought comfort in someone else because he didn't know how to face the issues in our marriage. It wasn't an excuse, but it helped me understand why he had made the choices he did. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine that maybe there was still a chance for us to fix things. I told Jason that despite everything, I was willing to forgive him. I was willing to move past the affair and try to rebuild our marriage if he was open to it. My heart was still holding on to hope, even after all the pain. I had loved this man for nearly 10 years, and I wasn't ready to let that love die without a fight. I wanted to believe that people could change, that relationships could heal after betrayal, and that we could find our way back to each other. Jason didn't reject the idea outright, and that gave me a spark of hope. He said he needed time to think, to figure out if he could truly commit to trying again. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. And in that moment, I held on to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to make it work. Over the next few weeks, things between us were different. There was still distance, but there were also moments of connection that I hadn't felt in a long time. We started spending more time together, even if it was just sitting on the couch in silence. It felt like we were rebuilding something, slowly but surely. The weight of the past months hadn't disappeared, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. I found myself hopeful again, believing that we were on the verge of a breakthrough. I thought that the honest conversations we had were the beginning of a new chapter, one where we could finally address the problems in our marriage and work through them together. For the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same team again, and it was a feeling I had missed desperately. I even started imagining what life could look like if we stayed together. I thought about how we could rebuild trust, how we could grow from this painful experience and become stronger as a couple. I believed that this could be the turning point we needed, I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to do the work. I thought Jason was too. But as the days passed, that glimmer of hope started to fade. While Jason had been open and honest with me in our conversations, he still seemed hesitant, like he was holding something back. He wasn't fully committing to the idea of trying again, and I could feel the uncertainty hanging in the air. It was like we were walking on a tightrope, and at any moment we could fall. I tried to ignore the doubts creeping into my mind. I wanted so badly to believe that we could fix things, that our love could survive the storm. But deep down, I knew that something was still missing. Jason wasn't as emotionally invested as I was. He was going through the motions, but his heart wasn't fully in it. One evening, I asked him directly if he was ready to make a decision about our future. I couldn't live in limbo anymore. I needed to know if we were going to fight for our marriage or if it was truly over. His response was hesitant, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. He wanted to want it, but he couldn't bring himself to say the words I so desperately needed to hear. "I'm not sure," he finally admitted. "I don't know if I can give you what you deserve." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. It was the moment I had been dreading. The moment when I realized that no matter how much I wanted to make things work, it wasn't going to happen. Jason couldn't commit to rebuilding our marriage, and I couldn't keep holding on to hope that wasn't there. As much as it hurt, I knew that I had to let go. I couldn't force Jason to stay if his heart wasn't in it. I couldn't keep holding on to a relationship that was no longer serving either of us. It was time to face the truth. Our marriage was over. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the ending I had hoped for, but it was an ending nonetheless. I realized that I didn't need Jason's commitment to move forward with my life. I could find my own path, my own healing without him. The hope I had clung to for so long was gone, but in its place, there was a new kind of hope, a hope for a future where I could be whole again on my own terms. This realization wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had been holding on to the past for so long that I hadn't allowed myself to imagine a future without Jason. Now, I was starting to see that maybe, just maybe, there was life beyond this heartbreak. After weeks of uncertainty, I could feel the tension between Jason and me growing stronger each day. The glimmer of hope I once held on to was fading, and deep down, I knew a decision was coming. I just didn't know when or how it would unfold. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for the inevitable fall. But even though I sensed the end was near, I wasn't ready to fully accept it. I kept hoping for a miracle, something that would change the course of our relationship and bring us back to what we once were. Then one evening, Jason asked to talk. His tone was serious, and I could see the weight of his decision in his eyes. I knew this was it, the moment I had been dreading. We sat down on the couch, and for a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the anxiety building inside me. Finally, Jason spoke, and his words cut through the silence like a knife. "I've made up my mind," he said softly. "I've already signed the divorce papers." It was as if time stopped in that moment. The finality of his words hit me like a wave crashing down. Even though I had sensed this was coming, hearing it from him felt like my heart had been shattered into a million pieces. I couldn't believe it was real, that our marriage, the life we had built together, was coming to an end. For a moment, I couldn't respond. My mind was racing, trying to process everything. The hope I had clung to was gone, and there was no more room for denial. Jason had made his choice, and there was nothing left for me to do but accept it. I wanted to cry, to scream, to ask him why it had come to this, but instead, I just sat there in stunned silence. "I'm sorry," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know this isn't what you wanted, and it's not easy for me either. But I think it's the best thing for both of us." The pain in his voice was clear, but it didn't make his decision any less heartbreaking. I had spent months fighting for our marriage, believing that we could overcome the challenges we were facing. But now, sitting here, I realized that no matter how much I wanted to save our relationship, Jason didn't feel the same way. He had made his decision, and there was no turning back. After a few moments of silence, I finally found my voice. "So this is it?" I asked, my voice shaky. "After everything, this is how it ends?" Jason nodded, his expression filled with regret. "I wish things could have been different," he said, "but I don't think I can give you the kind of relationship you deserve. I don't want to keep hurting you." His words stung, but I knew they were true. Deep down, I had known for a while that our marriage was broken beyond repair. I had been holding on to hope because I didn't want to face the reality of losing him. But now there was no avoiding it. The end had come, and there was nothing I could do to change that. For the next few minutes, we sat together in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. I kept thinking about all the memories we had shared, the good times, the moments of laughter and love. It was hard to accept that those moments were now part of the past. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it would be different from anything I had imagined. Eventually, I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the street below. The world outside seemed so calm, so normal, while inside, everything was falling apart. I felt a sense of numbness wash over me, as if my emotions had been drained away, leaving only emptiness behind. Jason stood up too, walking over to me. "I don't want to make this harder than it already is," he said gently. "I'm still here if you need anything during this process." I appreciated his offer, but I knew that from this point on, I had to start standing on my own. This was the end of one chapter in my life, but it was also the beginning of another, one where I had to learn to live without him. As painful as it was, I knew that I couldn't depend on Jason to help me through this. I had to find my own strength. "I'll be okay," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I believed it just yet. "I just need some time to process everything." Jason nodded, and after a few more moments of quiet, he left the room. As the door closed behind him, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. This was it, the final blow. Our marriage was over, and there was no going back. I had spent so long hoping for a different outcome, but now I had to face the reality of moving on. In the days that followed, the reality of the situation started to sink in. I received the official divorce papers in the mail, and signing them felt like the final step in letting go of the life I had known for so long. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I questioned whether I had made the right choice in accepting the end of our marriage. But deep down, I knew that holding on to something that was no longer working would only hurt me more in the long run. As I signed the papers, I felt a strange sense of closure. The chapter of my life with Jason was officially over, but that didn't mean my story was ending. In fact, it was just beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I had the strength to face it, no matter what challenges came my way. The final blow had been dealt, but I realized that it wasn't the end of me. It was simply the end of one chapter, and I was ready to start writing the next one. I wasn't sure what that next chapter would look like, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. The days following the signing of the divorce papers were some of the hardest I had ever faced. It was as if I was living in a fog, moving through my daily routine without really being present. Everywhere I turned, reminders of my life with Jason were staring back at me. Our wedding photos, the little trinkets we'd collected on vacations, even his favorite chair in the living room. Each item seemed to pull me back into the past, making it harder to accept the reality of my new life without him. At first, I didn't know how to begin the healing process. The pain of the breakup was still fresh, and my heart felt heavy with loss. I didn't want to face the world or talk to anyone about what had happened. I stayed in my house, isolating myself from friends and family, hoping that somehow the pain would just fade away on its own. But of course it didn't. After a few days of wallowing in sadness, I realized that I couldn't continue like this. I couldn't let my life be consumed by the end of my marriage. I needed to take steps to heal and move forward, no matter how painful it might be. I knew that healing wasn't something that would happen overnight, but it was something I had to start working on one day at a time. The first thing I did was remove the physical reminders of Jason from my home. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was necessary. I packed away the photos, the keepsakes, and anything else that brought up memories of our life together. As I boxed everything up, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. It hurt to put away the reminders of the life I had once loved, but at the same time, it felt like a small step toward reclaiming my space as my own. Once my house was free of those physical reminders, I realized that the next step was to reach out to the people who loved me. I had been avoiding my friends and family, not wanting to burden them with my problems. But I soon learned that I didn't have to go through this process alone. My friends were there for me, waiting with open arms and offering support in any way they could. One afternoon, my best friend, Sarah, came over to visit. We sat together in the living room, and for the first time, I opened up about everything that had happened. I told her about the emotional affair, the long months of uncertainty, and the moment Jason finally told me it was over. I shared my heartbreak, my fears about the future, and my struggle to find hope again. Sarah listened without judgment, and when I was finished, she gave me the encouragement I so desperately needed. She reminded me that I was strong, that I had already survived the hardest part, and that this was just a chapter in my life, not the whole story. Her words brought me comfort, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of hope flicker inside me. From that day on, I made a conscious effort to surround myself with positivity. I spent more time with friends and family, people who lifted me up and reminded me of the good things in life. We went out for coffee, took long walks in the park, and even had a few movie nights where we laughed together until our sides hurt. These moments of connection helped me feel grounded again, reminding me that I was still loved and valued, even without Jason in my life. Another important part of my healing process was rediscovering the things I love to do. For so long, my focus had been on my marriage and my role as a wife that I had lost touch with my own passions and interests. Now that I had the time and space to focus on myself, I started reconnecting with those things that brought me joy. I picked up a book I had been meaning to read for months and got lost in the story. I began cooking new recipes, experimenting with flavors in the kitchen, and enjoying the simple pleasure of preparing a meal just for myself. I even signed up for a painting class, something I hadn't done in years. Each of these small acts helped me rediscover who I was outside of my relationship, and they reminded me that I had my own identity, separate from my marriage. Therapy also played a huge role in my healing journey. I started seeing a therapist weekly, someone who helped me process the emotions I was dealing with. In our sessions, I talked about the betrayal I had experienced, the loss of trust, and the feelings of rejection that still haunted me. My therapist guided me through the pain, helping me understand that my self-worth wasn't tied to Jason's actions or the end of our marriage. Through therapy, I learned how to be kinder to myself. I had spent so much time blaming myself for the breakdown of my marriage, wondering if I could have done something differently to save it. But over time, I began to realize that the failure of our relationship wasn't entirely my fault. Relationships are complex, and sometimes, despite our best efforts, they don't work out. I had done everything I could to save our marriage, and that was enough. As the weeks turned into months, I could feel myself growing stronger. The pain of the divorce didn't disappear completely, but it became more manageable. I began to feel more at peace with the situation, accepting that the end of my marriage was just a part of my story, not the end of it. I was starting to see that life after Jason could still be full of joy, hope, and possibility. One day, as I was sitting outside on my porch, I realized something important. I was finally ready to let go of the past. The wounds that had once felt so raw were starting to heal, and I no longer felt the need to hold on to the pain. I had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about accepting it and finding a way to move forward. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that my healing journey wasn't over, but I had come a long way. I was stronger than I had ever imagined, and I was ready to embrace the future with an open heart. My marriage may have ended, but my life was far from over. I was filled with hope for the next chapter, whatever it might bring. As the months passed, I gradually began to rebuild my life. The pain of the divorce was still there, but it wasn't as sharp as it had been. I found myself growing more comfortable with my new reality, and with each passing day, I became more independent. For so long, my identity had been tied to being Jason's wife, but now I was learning what it meant to be just Amanda on my own. One of the most challenging parts of this process was learning how to trust myself again. After the emotional affair and everything that had happened with Jason, I felt like I had lost a piece of who I was. It wasn't just about losing him. It was about losing the version of myself I had known for so long. I had been a wife for nearly 10 years, and now I had to figure out who I was without that title. It wasn't easy. At first, I doubted myself constantly. I wondered if I was strong enough to handle life on my own, if I could make decisions without second-guessing everything. But as I started taking small steps forward, I realized that I was capable of so much more than I had given myself credit for. One of the first things I did was tackle my finances. Jason had always been the one who handled our budget and bills, and after the divorce, I found myself feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility. But instead of letting fear paralyze me, I decided to take control. I sat down one evening, spread out all the bills in front of me, and made a plan. I created a budget, set financial goals for myself, and figured out how to manage everything on my own. It felt empowering. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't relying on anyone else. I was making decisions for myself, taking charge of my life, and the more I did it, the more confident I became. I started feeling more in control, not just of my finances, but of my entire future. With that newfound confidence, I began exploring other aspects of my life that I had neglected during my marriage. I had always been interested in learning new skills, but over the years, I had let that part of myself fade away. Now that I had more time and space to focus on my own growth, I decided to challenge myself in new ways. I enrolled in an online course to learn graphic design, something I had always been curious about but never had the time to pursue. At first, I struggled with the learning curve. It was all new to me, but I didn't give up. Slowly, I started getting better, and the sense of accomplishment I felt was incredible. Each small victory in the course reminded me that I could still learn, grow, and achieve things on my own. That sense of independence extended to my social life as well. During my marriage, I had let some friendships slip away, focusing so much on my relationship with Jason that I forgot to nurture other connections. But after the divorce, I realized how important those friendships were. I reached out to old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, and started rebuilding those relationships. We began meeting for coffee, going out for dinners, and even planning weekend trips together. It was refreshing to have those meaningful connections again, and it made me realize how much I had missed having strong, supportive people in my life. These friendships helped me feel less alone, and they reminded me that I was surrounded by people who cared about me, no matter what. One of the most important lessons I learned during this time was how to enjoy my own company. At first, being alone felt strange and uncomfortable. I had spent so many years sharing my life with someone else that I didn't know how to fully enjoy solitude. But gradually, I began to embrace it. I started going to the movies by myself, taking long walks in the park, and even treating myself to solo dinners at my favorite restaurants. What I discovered was that being alone didn't have to be lonely. In fact, it became a time for me to reflect, recharge, and reconnect with myself. I found joy in simple things like reading a good book, cooking a meal just for me, or spending a quiet evening watching the sunset. It was in these moments of solitude that I began to truly appreciate who I was as an individual, not just as someone's partner. As I became more comfortable with my independence, I also began setting new goals for my future. For so long, my goals had been tied to my marriage and my relationship with Jason. Now, I had the freedom to dream about what I wanted for myself. I started making a list of things I wanted to accomplish, both big and small. Some of my goals were practical, like saving money for a trip I had always wanted to take or getting a promotion at work. Others were more personal, like learning a new language or starting a blog to share my experiences with others who might be going through similar challenges. Having these goals gave me something to work toward, and it helped me focus on the future instead of dwelling on the past. Through all of this, I learned that independence isn't about doing everything alone. It's about trusting yourself, believing in your own strength, and knowing that you are capable of building a fulfilling life, whether you're in a relationship or not. It's about finding balance between relying on yourself and allowing others to support you when you need it. As I continued to grow and evolve, I realized that I didn't need anyone else to define my happiness. I was discovering happiness within myself, in the life I was creating, and in the person I was becoming. I no longer felt like I had to rely on someone else for my sense of worth or fulfillment. Looking back, I can see how far I've come. The woman who felt lost and broken after her marriage ended is not the same woman I am today. I'm stronger, more confident, and more in tune with who I am. My journey toward independence wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. I'm no longer afraid of being on my own. In fact, I've come to embrace it. My independence has given me a sense of freedom and empowerment that I never knew I needed. It has shown me that I am capable of creating a beautiful, fulfilling life on my own terms. As I stand at this new chapter in my life, I feel hopeful for the future. I don't know what's next, but I do know that whatever comes my way, I'm ready for it. I've found strength in my independence, and I've learned that I am enough just as I am. As I continued my journey toward healing and independence, I reached a point where I finally felt at peace. It had been a long and challenging road, but I had come out on the other side stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever the future had in store. The pain of my divorce hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it had become part of my story, a chapter that helped shape the person I had become. One of the biggest changes in my life was the newfound sense of freedom. For years, my decisions had been tied to my marriage and what Jason and I had planned together. But now, for the first time in a long time, I had the freedom to choose my own path. I could make decisions based solely on what I wanted, without worrying about how it would affect someone else. This realization was both exciting and a little scary. I had spent so much time focusing on my role as a wife that I had forgotten what it was like to dream big for myself. But now, the possibilities felt endless. I could travel, learn new things, meet new people, and pursue passions that I had put on hold for so long. One of the first things I did was take a solo trip. It was something I had always wanted to do, but had never found the right time or courage to make it happen. I booked a flight to a destination I had always dreamed of visiting, packed my bags, and set off on an adventure. The experience was incredible. Being on my own, exploring a new place, and meeting new people gave me a sense of empowerment that I hadn't felt in years. During that trip, I spent a lot of time reflecting on everything I had been through. I thought about the pain, the struggles, and the moments of doubt, but I also thought about how far I had come. I realized that the divorce, as painful as it was, had given me a chance to rediscover myself. It had pushed me out of my comfort zone and forced me to grow in ways I hadn't expected. As I sat on the beach one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It was as if the weight of the past had finally lifted, and I was ready to step fully into this new chapter of my life. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time I felt hopeful. I wasn't afraid of the unknown anymore. Instead, I was excited about the possibilities. When I returned home from my trip, I felt refreshed and ready to continue building the life I wanted. I made a list of goals, things I wanted to achieve in the next year, both big and small. Some were practical, like saving money for another trip or advancing in my career. Others were more personal, like continuing to focus on my self-care and maintaining the healthy relationships I had rebuilt with friends and family. I also started to think about love again. It wasn't something I had been ready to consider during the early stages of my healing process, but now I felt open to the idea. I knew that I didn't need a relationship to be happy, but I also knew that if the right person came along, I would be open to exploring that possibility. One afternoon, while I was out with friends, I met someone. His name was Ryan, and from the moment we started talking, there was an instant connection. He was kind, funny, and respectful, everything I had hoped for in a partner. We spent the evening getting to know each other, and by the end of the night, I couldn't help but feel excited about what might come next. Over the next few weeks, Ryan and I continued to spend time together. We went on walks, shared meals, and talked about our lives. There was something easy and comfortable about being around him. He understood my journey, respected my independence, and wasn't trying to rush anything. For the first time since my divorce, I felt like I had found someone who appreciated me for who I was, without any pressure or expectations. As our relationship developed, I realized that love could look different the second time around. It didn't have to be about rushing into something or trying to fit into a mold. It could be about two people, with their own stories and experiences, coming together in a way that felt natural and healthy. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I had already found that completeness within myself. But I was open to sharing my life with someone who valued me for who I was. While my relationship with Ryan was blossoming, I continued to focus on my own growth. I kept taking my graphic design courses, and eventually, I started freelancing. What had once been a hobby had now turned into a side career, and I loved every moment of it. Creating designs, working with clients, and seeing my work come to life gave me a sense of pride and accomplishment. My friendships, too, had grown stronger. I made it a priority to stay connected with the people who had supported me through the hardest times. We continued to have weekly coffee dates and plan trips together. These relationships were a source of joy and strength, and I was grateful for the love and support they brought into my life. Through it all, I learned that happiness doesn't come from one single source. It's not about having the perfect relationship or the perfect job. It's about finding balance, surrounding yourself with people who lift you up, and pursuing the things that bring you fulfillment. I had found that balance, and it had given me a sense of peace and contentment that I hadn't known before. Looking back on everything, I could see how far I had come. The journey had been painful and difficult, but it had also been transformative. I had learned that I was stronger than I ever realized, and that no matter what life threw at me, I could handle it. The end of my marriage had felt like the end of my world, but in reality, it was just the beginning of something new. I had found strength in my independence, love in my friendships, and hope in the possibilities of the future. I was no longer defined by my past or my pain. I was defined by the person I had become, a person who was ready to embrace life with an open heart and an open mind. This new chapter was just beginning, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take me. Whatever happened next, I knew I was ready. End note: The Quiet Flow of Life. A reflection on healing and rebirth. Life, much like a river, winds its way through both gentle bends and sharp turns, carrying us forward even when we think we have become still. Amanda had always thought of her life as a predictable stream. It flowed in one direction, her marriage the steady current. But when the divorce came, it felt as if the river had collided with a dam, and she was left adrift in a pool of confusion, uncertainty, and pain. In the months that followed, Amanda often found herself reflecting on the changes in her life, though she never fully understood the deeper purpose of those reflections. She felt the world was shifting around her, and yet, beneath the surface, there was a calmness, a subtle flow that beckoned her to understand something more profound than the immediate loss she had endured. She wasn't aware of it at first, but Amanda's healing process was not just a journey of emotional recovery, but also a spiritual awakening. She had never thought of herself as deeply spiritual, but as she spent time in nature, walking alone by rivers and sitting in quiet gardens, she began to sense the presence of something ancient and wise, whispering through the trees and flowing in the streams. This was the spirit of life itself, the essence of what Shinto teachings call kami. In Shintoism, kami are not gods in the Western sense, but spirits that inhabit everything: rocks, rivers, trees, even the wind. Amanda came to understand, slowly and quietly, that her journey was not separate from the natural world around her. Like the flow of water, she was part of something larger, something that moved in its own rhythm. It was in these quiet moments of reflection that Amanda realized her divorce wasn't an end, but a transformation. The river of her life had not ceased to flow, it had simply changed direction. Shinto teaches that life is cyclical, and every ending is but a new beginning. This idea, of constant rebirth and transformation, became the foundation of Amanda's healing. She began to embrace the idea that her pain was not something to be feared or fought against, but something to be honored. The deep sadness she had felt was not a flaw, nor was it a punishment. It was part of the natural flow of life, much like a storm that sweeps through the landscape, only to leave it refreshed and renewed. In Shinto practice, there is a reverence for nature cycles, birth, death, and rebirth, and Amanda began to see her emotional journey in the same way. Her divorce, she realized, was not a failure. It was a moment in time, a shift in the current of her life. In Shintoism, the idea of Musuhi, the power of creation and birth, is central. Everything in life is constantly being created and recreated, and Amanda came to see her own life through this lens. Her marriage had ended, yes, but in its place, something new was being born. She was being reborn, too, wiser, stronger, and more connected to the flow of life. One evening, as she sat by the edge of a quiet stream, Amanda found herself reflecting on the concept of wa, or harmony, a core teaching in Shinto. Wa isn't simply about peace. It's about balance, about finding harmony with the world and with oneself. She thought about how she had spent years in her marriage trying to force happiness, trying to maintain an image of a perfect life, even when the currents were pulling her in a different direction. But now, she understood that true harmony comes not from forcing things to stay the same, but from accepting change as part of life's natural rhythm. She had been fighting against the flow, resisting the changes that were inevitable. But the more she tried to hold on, the more painful it had become. It was only when she surrendered to the current, when she allowed herself to let go of the past, that she began to find peace. Amanda's reflection led her to a deeper understanding of the Shinto concept of Kanagara, living in accordance with the way of the kami, or the natural order of the universe. It's the idea that, by aligning oneself with the natural flow of life, one can achieve a state of grace and harmony. For Amanda, this meant letting go of the need to control everything, to have all the answers. It meant trusting that life, like the river, would carry her forward if she allowed it to. She thought back to the months following her divorce, to the moments when she felt most lost and broken. She realized now that those were the moments when she had been closest to finding herself. In Shinto, there is a reverence for the kokoro, the heart or spirit, which is considered pure and connected to the divine. Amanda's heart, which had been shattered by loss, was now open in a way it had never been before. She was reconnecting with the purity of her spirit, learning to listen to the quiet wisdom within. As she continued to reflect on her journey, Amanda found herself thinking about the concept of Tama, the soul. In Shinto belief, the Tama is constantly being purified through life's experiences. Pain, joy, loss, and love all serve to cleanse the soul, to make it stronger and more attuned to the natural world. Amanda realized that her pain had, in a sense, purified her. It had stripped away the illusions she had clung to, revealing the deeper truths of who she was and what she truly needed. She thought about how, before the divorce, she had defined herself so much by her relationship with Jason. But now, she understood that her true self was much larger than any one relationship. Her soul, her Tama, was connected to the infinite flow of life itself. She was part of the natural world, part of the same cycles of creation and rebirth that governed everything around her. By embracing this understanding, Amanda felt a deep sense of peace. She no longer saw her divorce as a failure, but as a necessary part of her journey. She had been carried through the storm, and now, on the other side, she was stronger, more grounded, and more in tune with the flow of life. As she stood up from the stream and began to walk back home, Amanda felt the quiet rhythm of her steps aligning with the pulse of the earth. She knew that, like the river, her life would continue to flow forward, carrying her toward new experiences, new joys, and new challenges. But she no longer feared what lay ahead. She trusted in the flow, in the kami that guided her, and in the strength of her own kokoro. She had found her way back to harmony, to wa, and she knew that no matter what came next, she was ready.